I'm Madeline Blair, and this is Unlocked. You can't have a successful career without knowing how to deal with the unexpected, and Unlocked is here to help you do that. If you're a person who sets goals that challenge you to fully reach your potential, this show is for you. This is a show all about opening possibilities so that when you're hit with the unexpected, you have options from which to choose. Thank you for joining me today. You can learn more about the show on my website, madelineblair.com/unlockedtv. And it includes all the replays from earlier shows. And if you have a topic or a question, just email them to me at madeline@madelineblair.com. And lastly, if you're curious about the background of this show, check out my book, Unlocked, Discover How to Embrace the Unexpected, available on Kindle, audio, and paperback. If you would like to explore what it means to build and nurture your resilience with me, be sure to sign up for my mailing list on my website, madelineblair.com. I'll keep you informed about my new group mentoring program, Unlocking Together. Our topic today is curiosity and creativity, or I could say curiosity and innovation. They all kind of go together. You know, in my research, highly resilient individuals were not just curious, they were insatiably curious. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "I think at a child's birth, if a mother could ask a fairy godmother to endow it with the most useful gift, that gift would be curiosity." Clearly, those highly resilient individuals had a copious gift of curiosity, but more importantly, it was never dampened out of them. I'm always curious how a child loses its curious nature and why we let that happen. Today, companies are constantly innovating as a survival technique. Yet innovation begins with creative minds that are curious. Today, I want to have us explore how we can nurture curiosity within ourselves and our businesses so that the creativity that leads to innovation is constantly fed. Knowledge is important as well, and curiosity is the door to learning more. As usual, Dr. Ed Hoffman, former Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA, will be joining me on an exploration. The exploration today is about this thing called curiosity and how how it is the door that opens learning, innovation, creativity, and conversation. Let's join that conversation. Curiosity.
One of my favorite words.
Say more.
I think first of all, you could use curiosity as a description of a situation or people or of a place that are looking for things, or you can probably look at it as a characteristic. And I would guess, I think people like us, we like the notion of curiosity. I'll link it also to exploration. We're trying to find, we're trying to search, we're trying to understand. And I connect it also to work that was done by John Kay and Mervyn King on radical uncertainty. And the leap that I make with there, and I've been studying this recently, is we live increasingly in a world that there are not known answers. So if we live in a place where there really are not clear answers, you better be curious, right? To figure things out, to explore, to search.
Really sparks an idea in my head, and that is this aspect of if there isn't a clear answer, you really, yes, you can be curious, but you really have to, in a sense, discipline yourself to say, I'm not going to come to a conclusion until I've asked maybe 10 questions, just to help me see the possibilities that are in front of me. And it's almost like you ask the question, not necessarily to find the answer, but to see a new perspective.
I think, again, in working with you or watching with you as a friend, I think also that's what I see. We have different approaches, but I think I see that because you love asking questions. I love asking questions too.
Yeah.
I've got the list, and I've seen certainly when you are in a discussion with people, the coaching method has a lot to do with questioning, getting people to understand what's going on. And I don't think you know exactly that there's a certain outcome being desired. It's just that curiosity, that search to get into that better place.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right that when you, especially in those kinds of settings where you're trying to help another individual, if you have the end in mind, that's not helping them get there. You have to keep it open so that they create the path for themselves through your questions and their responses to it.
And isn't that good leadership?
That does relate to leadership, doesn't it? Because if you go in always knowing how you're going to do something, you haven't given your staff an opportunity to explore possibilities of getting it done.
Yeah. If you stay within what you know, then you don't get better. You don't grow.
Yeah.
And the people I've loved working for and with, typically they have encouraged me in different ways to take chances, to explore. Usually with the caveat coming from a place like NASA is, what's the worst thing that can happen if your idea goes wrong? Will it end up on the cover of the Washington Post? And when you say no, it's not going to, then I've been told by the best leaders, well, go for it, explore, and let's see what we come up with.
I thought for sure our conversation was going to start in another place, but I've this path. But I'm still going to go back to where I thought we were going to start, which is that we're a curious species. I don't know how our children learn to not ask questions and not to explore, because we're born that way. I remember that growing up, there was just no place in our house or on our land that I didn't want to put my foot there so I could say I'd been there and I knew what was there. My mother just couldn't necessarily control me well enough. Right. But that's not always the case in people's families, that they allow them to do that. Yeah. And yet curiosity is so important for this moment in time, which is what we talked about just a minute ago, that the answers aren't clear today. And so we have to keep ourselves very open.
And the people that I think, to me at least, are most provocative is the people you bring on to the show. I love, because in so many cases when we're talking about who you're having, or when I listen to them, it's, I didn't think of that. But then very quickly it's, wow, I should have been thinking about that, or I'm glad we're exploring this. And I think I'm not this kind of a scientist, but I'm guessing that curiosity is a evolutionary advantage for a species that has to change, that has to deal with new issues, that humans today deal with dramatically different issues than 30 years ago, massively different than 100 years ago, right? So we're constantly evolving, we're constantly moving forward. And there's an indication of a person who's saying, why don't we do it differently? Or the frame, I guess, Robert Kennedy quote, others see things as they are and they're good with that, but I'm saying, why not do something different? Totally change that, paraphrase. But I think it's an evolutionary advantage, curiosity, and it has to be stamped out of us as children for us not to have it. That humans are meant for it, that curiosity is the norm, and different ideas and colors are what we're about.
But I want to go back to your premise that it's an evolutionary advantage for humans. But if you look at the animal species, there are many of them that are curious. Cats are curious. We even speak about the fact that cats are curious. Yeah. I'll never forget, I volunteered to take care of someone's cat while they went off on a sabbatical. And I would say within 2 days, that cat had found every room, every cabinet, every shelf in the entire house, because it just constantly explored every nook and cranny. And it drove me crazy because I'm not used to having it at that time. Yeah. But I said, wow, there was a real example of an animal really being curious, making sure they knew all the pieces. Yeah. So in some of the species, it may very well have been also part of their evolutionary.
And probably in ways we don't know. I've been watching a show on animals. I think it's The Living Secrets of Animals. And they all have different capabilities that, of one of the things like dogs, and this has been researched recently a lot more, is that they have a genetic component that's really geared towards being, I guess, empathetic. towards people.
Yeah.
And there's this warmth. And while it's cute and it's lovely, for them, it's a massive advantage because they've lived with humans for thousands of years now.
Yeah.
This ability to be cute, and we want to live with them and they want to live with us, and they eat better and all that stuff. So all these different ways that there's evolve, and probably ways that they can, in their own sense, explore new boundaries.
I'm curious now about how we take these ideas about curiosity and bring them into the workplace. Well, we'll get back to Ed's answer a little bit later on. But for now, I'm very excited because I want to introduce to you my guest today, Kelly Widelska. Kelly, welcome to Unlocked.
Thanks so much, Madeline. I'm super excited for this conversation. As you know, curiosity is one of my favorite topics.
Is it? Oh, well, good. Well, Kelly Widelska has been a knowledge management and learning professional for 24 years. She built her career at EY. Now, is that Ernst & Young?
Yeah, that's Ernst & Young.
Okay, EY, the professional service firm, through various roles which took her to 3 continents. Her final role was knowledge leader at EY's Global Transaction Advisory Services practice, where she led the knowledge and innovation team. She has just completed 10 years at the International Finance Corporation, IFC sometimes called, a member of the World Bank Group and the largest global development institution focused on the private sector, where she was global head of knowledge and learning for 8 years. She spent the last 2 years as the Economic Inclusion Advisor for the Gender and Economic Inclusion Group, building out a program to drive greater investment in underserved groups. And don't worry, if you don't understand that phrase, economic inclusion, we'll make sure she lays that out for us and why it's important. Her values are about allowing each of us to express ourselves to the world more fully. And I love this last point, as it touches so much on how so many times we feel we must stifle who we are in order to get along. But more about that later. Again, welcome, Kelly, to Unlocked, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much, Madeline, and super excited to hear I'm in hallowed company with Ed Hoffman and also Eleanor Roosevelt as well, as per the introduction.
I always like to bring, the chorus in. Okay, you've spent a lot of years in knowledge management. Now, why is this such an important area in an organization?
Because organizations are filled with people who know things, and those people often don't share. The conditions have to be right for people to share. And we know that knowledge is power, and we know that knowledge is more powerful when it is shared. So knowledge management is important because it's a broad discipline which brings lots of different types of approaches to kind of unlocking organizational performance, effectiveness, and the potential of not only people, but also the strategy implementation. So for me, and I had this on my wall, because knowledge management is quite an esoteric discipline for lots of people. And trying to explain it to my mum, still not quite sure whether she understands what I do 24 years later, but it's order out of chaos. You think about a small organization, which is what Ernst & Young is, 4,000 or so people, different individuals, all doing their job. It's a global organization. They're doing lots of different things. How do you make sense of that? And how do you bring that together? So order out of chaos knowledge management will help you do that by bridging across silos, by collating information together, making it easier to find stuff, by creating the connections so that knowledge is not only stored effectively and can be accessed effectively, but it can also flow across the organization, and the right connections for people can take place. Knowledge management can help do that. And also, finally, it really supports kind of a risk management discipline. If you think about organizations are full of people, they're all on their own learning journeys and career journeys. They all know a lot of things about what's going on in the organization, and they could all win the lottery the next day and walk out that door with 25, 26, 10 years of experience. And you don't want to lose your experience, because that's fundamental to how you are as an organization. So I think knowledge management programs can often help mitigate that risk, as well as making sure that your employees are, well paid and cared for. Knowledge management programs can help with that. So that's why KM is really important. It can drive effectiveness. It can make people also feel community in organizations, and it can connect them to new and interesting things.
I have been in knowledge management myself since even before it was called knowledge management. And I must say, your description of its value is the clearest that I've heard in a very long time.
Excellent.
You said order out of chaos. I love that. And the fact that it mitigates risk. Beautiful. Well, our topic today, I'm going to get in on this thing. Let's see, where am I? There. That's what I wanted. Our topic today is curiosity. Now, I've called this show sometimes curiosity and innovation, and sometimes curiosity and creativity. But to me, those three words are the same, almost the same, not quite, because innovation is more in terms of putting it into action. But I'm now curious. Let's begin with your understanding of curiosity and its relationship between knowledge management and curiosity.
So I looked it up, as any curious person does. What's the actual definition? So I wasn't going to misrepresent it. Curiosity is a strong desire to know or to learn something. And I think, again, the link to knowledge management and knowledge management in organizations, that you have these groups of people who are collated together to do stuff. And they will have to know how to do the things that they need to do. And as we said, knowledge management is this kind of collation and creation of different knowledge to drive strategy and drive performance. But you have to have that kind of access organized. You have to make sure that the conditions are right, because oftentimes, and I'm speaking from my own experience, having worked at EY, large organization, I think it was 200,000 people when I was there. IFC, smaller, but very complicated. Oftentimes organizations create these silos because silos drive productivity, and that's important because we're all here to get a job done and we're all here to meet our targets, but that often stifles creativity because you're just in your zone. You've got to do what you've got to do. And I think knowledge management and the discipline and the multifaceted nature of the discipline could really work across those silos, and who can create the conditions for greater sharing. And greater sharing builds trust, and trust begets, I think, safety. And I think safety also begets curiosity, because as soon as you feel you are safer in an organization, it's okay to ask the questions and it's okay to put your hand up. So I think that's why knowledge management is so important kind of in organizations. It also, those connections allow you to connect with different people to create new ideas, because you may have that aha moment. And those aha moments come from interacting with content. I'm reading a document on blended finance. I'm like, oh, wow. Or I'm listening to somebody talk about something that I know nothing about. And I'm like, oh, how do I apply what I know to that? So you're creating these aha moments through these connections and through these access to content. And I think the final piece is, again, that knowledge management allows you to create those conditions for creativity and innovation through safety, through different experiences. So I think that's how they're kind of connected in my mind. It's not just all about managing content.
Amen to that.
Amen to that, exactly.
What struck me as you were talking was, and I've said this quote many times, but it was for me life-changing. It's when John Seely Brown said that innovation occurs in the white spaces between disciplines. So anytime that you are reading something, you're talking to someone, you encounter an event that's slightly away from your norm, from your typical discipline, you suddenly see the world in a different way and new ideas come to mind. So I really appreciate that you called that out specifically. Well, let me ask you this. Were there moments in your work where you really felt people began to understand this value of being curious, of exploring new things?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I arrived at the IFC at what I call peak arrogance. I don't really know this concept. It's normally around your late 30s when you've done some stuff and you're like, right, I've got this. I've worked in bigger organizations.
You know what that reminds me of? Like a 16-year-old, right?
Pretty similar. You're like, you feel kind of like you've seen the world. You've got your grey hair. There's more grey now. I arrived at IFC. It was a much smaller organization I'd been to, but I sat within it for a year. My amazing team had just put on like Knowledge Day, where they started to get people to come together, and it was actually really successful. And I kind of sat back a bit, saw how successful it was, kind of immersed myself a little bit more in through a current state assessment of what was going on in the organization, understood the organization dynamics a bit, and then said to my delightful team that it was time to do Knowledge Week. We were going to up the game the following year. So we upped the game. We also, didn't create this ourselves. This whole idea of knowledge sharing weeks is quite common across organizations. It's often used as a good knowledge management practice to drive some creativity and connections. But we moved from Knowledge Day to Knowledge Week. And then my poor little team, because it was very successful, my poor little team were like, when I said, well, how are we going to up our success? We're going to do a knowledge month. So we went to what we call November, and it was placed specifically in the calendar. So it wasn't busy season. People had a bit more time and space to think. And we knew that with our previous two kind of experiments, that this kind of time in the calendar allowed people to kind of think a little bit differently, it allowed them a bit of space and time. And they actually attended and they turned up. And we, of course, we loaded the bases with, free food, senior leadership engagement. So people felt like they really should come. And then they realized they stayed. What's the phrase? You come for the food and you stay for the content. People realized that it was really, really interesting. So more and more people turned up. We put on more and more interesting sessions. We understood, because we, got some feedback loops about what people were interested in. And we found more and more seasoned professionals taking the time, and time is like the most critical thing in an organization, especially at senior leadership level. We found more and more seasoned professionals coming in, and one, volunteering their time because they saw the value of sharing their content outside of their networks, and then two, actually attending sessions. And when you've got a vice president sitting next to you as a junior staff listening to the same presentation that you are, it's really powerful and kind of shifts some of the knowledge sharing dynamic, which is what we were after. And just we crafted a whole set of sessions, so basic skills training, interesting sessions, stuff which were linked to corporate priorities. So we didn't just make it up. We were like, okay, what's the biggest 3 things that everybody's organization has to know this year? And when we loaded our sessions like that, we were online and we recorded all of them, because we also recognized, this was pre-COVID, that people couldn't always attend. And we also focused quite a lot on lessons, because lessons are really important, especially in the environments that the IFC kind of will, in every organization, but especially for us and for our leadership. But just to give you some examples of sort of the numbers, I come from finance, so numbers is all important. So in 2014, we had 74 sessions, 2,700 people joined us. 2019, this is the time I think I've really worn my team out. We had 103 sessions over the month as global. 4,250 people turned up. And over the course of the entirety of its kind of existence, November, we've had 650 sessions with 23,000 participants. They're all like an hour long, if not a little bit more. So that's a lot of hours invested in by the organization and by also the people inside. So I think tells the story of the value that that can really be brought by people being curious and giving themselves the time, as long as you create the conditions for them.
23,000. I know the IFC isn't that big. So you were drawing from, what was your audience?
So admittedly, our success did work far and wide. So we did have some of the World Bank Group people come with us as well. So it's over 650 sessions over a course of like 5 or 6 years as we ran the program.
Yeah.
But yeah, the first one, 2014, was 74 sessions, 2,700 people. That was over half of IFC potentially attended our sessions. So yeah, we had struck a nerve that people wanted to share their content and receive new content and be allowed to do it.
I love the fact that you began with people wanted to share their content, because we always think of it as, well, you really need to learn, you really need to learn, you really need to, well, but there has to be someone there who wants to share it. And I know my experience with World Bank Group people, they really do like to share what they know, because in many times they are the world expert on something. Yeah, fabulous.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
That's what I call real success.
It has to be right, though. So you have to really kind of craft it to the shape of the organization. Again, create those conditions.
Yeah. Well, my next question, and I'm still curious though about it, what kind of staff are more likely to pick up on the value of new knowledge, or what were the characteristics of the people who immediately came? And obviously more, but what did you see in your experience?
So it was interesting as we started to build momentum. So you often got people who wanted a free lunch, and you're fine. People can come for a free lunch. That's really not a problem. But essentially, we knew who we were targeting, because we knew it was all linked through to organizational performance, and we knew what topics were important for the whole organization, what topics were important to drive particular strategy, and also what topics were underrepresented, and that people should know, but often wouldn't take the time to know. So we saw, it was successful, and we saw that uptick. For me personally, as a kind of a knowledge manager, I believe all staff have that opportunity. And humans, as you said right at the very beginning, are inherently curious people, or curious species. They're all individuals, they're all human. If you create the right conditions for them, then, and understand the motivation in an organization, then I think everybody has that capacity. And that's understanding the motivation is so clear and important. What's driving these people, what's driving them to share. Is it safety? Have they got other issues that they're worrying about? Are they interested in promotion? Do they just want to hold their position? Are they enmeshed in politics? What's going to be the right levers that we could actually use? And I think everybody experiences that in organizations, and that all staff have that. All staff can benefit from these type of kind of group experiences if we get the conditions right, and it can spur them on to new and different behaviors.
One of the things I really liked about what you said was that if a person was really interested in promotion, that was okay. That was a legitimate reason to draw them to an event, to relate it to performance and that kind of thing. So often we tend to say, well, that's their agenda. But in fact, it's the agenda of the organization, because they're part of the organization. And I love the fact that you really targeted whatever was a particular need. And if you found that need was real and there was something you could give value to, bring value to it, I liked that.
Excellent. That's good, because it was quite successful. So it was one of my better ideas. And the team were immense who pulled it off.
Oh, fantastic. Fantastic. I know what it feels like to be in the midst of creating something like that. It's a lot of work.
It was pretty wild. I had just thinking about, obviously November and knowledge sharing events are kind of one type of kind of value that is kind of created at work. Have you, I mean, you have a vast career, have done many different things. Have you kind of found other experiences where people have understood the value of kind of curiosity, and how has that helped change an organization?
I used to run sessions called information flow analysis. That was really a prelude to knowledge management, because people didn't even understand that the knowledge that was in one corner of the organization had to flow to another one in order for everybody to be able to perform. And in those sessions, I would have usually a cross section, and I called it a diagonal section, because I wanted to have some senior people and some junior people, everybody in between, so that they were talking at different levels across different functions. And there was always a moment in those sessions where someone would say, wow, I didn't know that, and it's so critical to what I do. Why that had not happened, why no one had facilitated that before, I couldn't answer that question. Maybe they just didn't think of it. It was just a matter of bringing different perspectives together and creating for them an environment. I liked your word, trust and safety, or maybe that was Ed who said that. But that aspect is so important. You create that. Certainly as a facilitator, I did that. And then they can begin to really share and see what comes for themselves. Yeah. So that was my experience.
Yeah, excellent.
I want us to push a little bit to innovation and creativity. And in this, did you see examples where just the fact that people were talking about a subject they hadn't necessarily talked about before, that creative ideas and innovation came out of that?
I mean, yes is the answer, because I believe that always happens. How much of that gets shared and becomes real products of benefit to the organization is something it's often not talked about in innovation programs. So often kind of structured innovation programs are like, well, we're going to get all these people together in a room and we're going to come up with the best idea, and then we're going to put money behind it, and it's going to change and transform the organization. I think that kind of forgets the fact that creativity, and this is one of my new favorite phrases, I've got it on my board, kind of creation is a process and not a product. And creativity is a process, not a product.
Yeah. And
a lot of times in organizations, there's a lot of ideas, and some of them work, some of them don't work. It's like a dartboard. Some of them hit. Well, for me, if I'm playing darts, some of them hit, some of them don't. And I think organizations often forget that, Nobel scientists are Nobel scientists for a reason. Like there's lots of ideas out there, but what's the one that's going to be truly transformational? So yes, lots of conversations have happened as a result. And then when you do, we had give an example. I ran an innovation competition called Space, which is the space to have, ideas and think. This is at IFC, and we set it specifically around 3 topics which were really important for us. And one of the ones that kind of comes to mind is food security. So how could we as IFC, what new ideas could we bring together which could help improve kind of the state of food security? And that's a big, broad topic. We put some conditions in around the kind of the teams who were allowed to think. We put a bit of prize money towards it. And the best thing, lots of ideas that came out, but we had to weed them out. We did the whole kind of getting people to vote on their ideas and crowdsourcing the voting. So we were kind of percolating ideas around, but only a few ideas kind of came out and went through to the judges' chamber, because you need to have that kind of filtering to get the best ideas to come to it. So I think it's definitely possible, but set your expectations that it's not often you find diamonds, because true creativity and thought, it takes a lot of pressure. That's why diamonds are scarce for a reason. And I think organizations are, yes, exactly. Organizations are a function of that. So yes, lots of things happen, and you have to be mindful that not everything is going to be life-changing organization changes, but just so often you will. And the project that won that innovation competition was called Cool Cows, and it was basically looking at the problem of the fact that it's very difficult to refrigerate milk when you have no electronic power. So there's two different kind of milk markets. There's a milk market, and so let's take a country in Africa. There's a milk market which you get to your milk to a particular place and at a certain time within a certain time limit, and you can then sell it and it goes into refrigeration. Or there's a secondary milk market, which is refrigerated milk, which means you have a different market. And that solution was what could we do with refrigeration techniques and energy techniques, because bringing together food security experts plus energy people together to try and solve that. And we thought that was a great idea, and that was the one that ended. And who doesn't like a solution called Cool Cows?
I love it. As soon as you said that, I had this image of
cows
the cow.
And indeed, it did actually have. They did have sunglasses on for their presentation. So it's true.
That's marvelous. And what excites me more is that we tend to think of the World Bank Group as rather this august group, and yet it comes down to really nuts and bolts to make things happen in the world. And I love that.
It's true. It really is. So yeah.
Well, and I also appreciated your what do you want to call it, the winnowing process, so that there was a constant assessment, so that you actually came to something that would really work and was useful. Yeah, I appreciated that a lot, because it's so easy to say, let 1,000 flowers bloom, when you really want to put your resources into something that has some obvious, well, not obvious, probable merit. That's the best way to say it. Okay. Yeah. I know that you're not working necessarily with these teams, but you have your own team. And certainly you probably needed to have a little creativity in them to come up with something to fill a month as opposed to a day or a week. So how did you help them remain enthusiastic and feeling safe and creative in those moments, and curious, so that you would come up with new ideas?
So I think kind of my approach as a manager is kind of very much linked to kind of fundamentals of who I am. I hate being told what to do. Like, I really hate it. I think it probably stems from childhood. And I've always felt that I've been at my best as an individual and organization when I've been able to bring my creativity, and I really value it. And that's something that I then, as a manager and a leader, have kind of brought into my teams. So I'm very clear about the outcome that I want, because I think it's important to set direction, because you're trying to achieve a business outcome. But how we get there and the roads that it takes, that's where I love having like a diverse team of people to really bring their experiences and their differences and things that I wouldn't have thought of, because I've only had my experience in organizations, and oftentimes things that won't work. And I am an eternal optimist in organizations. my team sometimes were like, that is not going to work. And I'm like, yes, it will. They're like, no, it won't. We've seen it. So it's about that listening piece. So I think focused on outcomes, but being completely open and allowing people the space to do that, and getting that, supporting them so they feel empowered, which is so important in teams, that, you know, you're not going to get in trouble. You know, as Ed said, you know, am I going to get on the, you know, on the front of the Wall Street Journal or whatever? Or is anybody going to die? No. Okay, let's go for it. But creating that belief in their ability, I think, is really important. And a team needs to be kind of created. You can't just chuck a load of people together and say, we're going that way, make some stuff up. It needs to be a little bit more hands-on than that. So it's a really fine balance for me about how you get the best out of teams. But by and large, that's how I've got the best out of my people, by giving them the space to create and navigate. They don't have to have all the answers, but they have to be able to bring all of that to the solution. And some bits will work and some bits are like, that's not going to happen. But, you know, that's the joy of being a boss. You get to say that, but you don't stifle the creativity at the beginning.
Yeah. Oh, I love talking with you because it's reminding me of my time at the World Bank. Because one of the things that I always did with my division was when we had annual retreats, I would bring in a facilitator because I didn't want to do that job. That's not my job. And I would open the retreat by saying, this is our mission for this year. You know, we have to achieve these objectives. This is what's been asked of us. Now I'm going to leave you in the great hands of this facilitator, and I'm going to let you come up with a solution. And I would leave. And they would come up with the entire plan, and then I'd come back in and they'd present it to me. And I would say that I accepted probably 95% of what they suggested. And so you're right. You allow people to use their own judgment and feel they have some control of things. And they really come up with amazing stuff. Amazing stuff.
And also you not being in the room, I think, like, I wasn't attending the meetings. You're empowering your people. Yeah. You're building your trust in them. Trust, as we know, builds safety, builds confidence. And I think that's really important. And it all stems from hating to be micromanaged or told what to do. So that's where it comes from.
Yeah. I fall in that same category when I am truthful with myself. Now, we've been talking a lot about IFC and the World Bank, but you recently left IFC. So what are your plans now?
So it kind of starts with my last 2 years at IFC. So I got curious about why IFC wasn't as engaged in the inclusion of other groups beyond gender. I identify as LGBT myself. I have a disability, and I was like, well, I'm really privileged. So what are we doing? And I got curious about that. And I looked for the ways that IFC does do inclusion, and does some fantastic, phenomenal work. Its gender-based financing work is, literally world leading, and it really led the world on this. So I got curious, and I looked at some of the statistics. So I'm a historian by training. So one, I'm always asking questions. Two, I'm an information manager. So I want to know the information. I could absorb lots of information. My brain starts buzzing. And I looked at the statistics and I was like, coming from a super privileged background, I was like, we need to be doing something about this. So pulled together a proposal, shared it used my privilege and my position to have the conversations with the senior leadership, to show them that here are the challenges, that we already, it was in our performance standards that we were inclusive in the labour market, and that we really could be doing more to better support that. And they said, fine, go away, come up with a program. Again, that kind of, we trust you. We know that there may be, some opportunities here to develop more content and more opportunities for inclusion. What have you got? So that kind of trust in me and then my abilities really allowed us to create out a program where we looked at economic inclusion. This is about access to jobs and livelihoods, and how do you make sure that everybody, whoever they are, given their race, their ethnicity, their indigeneity, their gender, their age, has access to economic opportunity. And we as an organization, that's what we do. We're a financing organization. We finance lots of different things around the world, especially in the global south and the global east. So what could we do? So this then led me to thinking a bit more about the pathways across the system. So the development finance system is a system. I love systems thinking. It's really it's the thing that's sparking my curiosity right now. What interventions need to happen in order to unlock finance? Because I believe money wants to flow, but there is stuff which is stopping it. So I finished my 2 years at IFC. We'd done a couple of pieces of thought leadership on inclusive banking for persons with disabilities and inclusive banking for LGBT people. We'd run peer-to-peer client groups for them to get curious about how they could be more inclusive in organizations. And we'd done a load of training and learning for people about how they could understand how to talk about these topics in the workplace without feeling a little bit, why am I talking about this at work? How is this a workplace issue? How is this a inclusion issue? How is this an IFC issue? So it was a lot of work like that. And that, I then looked at some more statistics and I was like, oh, the reality for LGBTI, for development financing, overseas development aid and philanthropic funding is that I think it's 567 million gets spent in the global south and east every 2 years to support one of the most marginalized communities in the globe, across the globe. That was pretty small. And I've come from very big, large finance organizations. So I am super curious about an entire system. I spent 8 years at IFC being curious about how to shift and change things across an organization in order to meet operational objectives. And I'm now super curious about what would it take to shift and tweak certain bits of a system so that the money could flow and inclusion could be better financed. So I'm going to spend, and I'm a big planner, so my 10 years is good. Next 10 years for me is like, how can I support a whole ecosystem to drive greater financing of inclusion through, doing things better, through technical assistance, through asking questions, through building capacity of people who make the decisions. It's going to get even more esoteric, and my mum is still not going to know what I'm going to be talking about. But that's what I'm really, really excited about doing, and doing with a group of people and a team, and starting to see, what's possible and what could actually be changed in 10 years. And I've chosen 10 years because, one, I've got a lot of grey hair, and tick tock, times are moving. And 2, 10 years is enough time, I think, to shift this type of challenge that exists in the world. That 67 countries around the world still criminalize homosexuality and what it's like to be LGBT, and there are very little protections from an employment perspective as well. So there's loads of different facets to this, and I think this is why I love the topic so much, because knowledge management is all about lots of different things. You have to know lots of different things, but you don't have to know a lot about everything, but you have to know a lot about different things, which means I get to bring my curiosity to that and kind of like play and have fun and ask questions and have amazing conversations which spark new ideas and hopefully create some aha moments which start to change, one, the financing, and 2, people's perspectives and mindsets as well. So that's kind of what's next for me over the next 10 years.
And
get paid. I have to get paid as well. So that's very important. I haven't quite worked out how I'm going to do that yet.
I've read in many areas, and one of the areas that I've been reading recently is in the value of, what's the right word? How we tend to place value on different kinds of people. If I see someone who is a beggar on the street, do I value that person less as an individual than a person who is sitting in an office doing whatever they're doing? And should I, as a human being, be even thinking about relative value? And there's a quote that I came across recently. Perhaps those whom we value least have the most to teach. I thought that was such a beautiful way to remind myself that it doesn't matter where that person is. They may be wearing a blue collar or they may be wearing a tutu. What is it that they can teach me about the world and humanity? So I really appreciate what you are talking about here in terms of opening those possibilities for people who may be considered the least value or
and I think it's important for us to all recognize that we come with our own bias based on our own experiences.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I believe in unconscious bias. I think bias is pretty conscious. I think it's important to check your bias.
Mm-hmm.
And to ask yourself the questions like you did, but that takes a lot of discipline.
It does,
especially in a super fast-paced world. And remembering your humanity, I think, is the biggest thing that I have kind of learned in the course of the last decade, and working with like multiple different people, different ages, and remembering yourself at that age or in that experience, and just it's mind-blowing. I think it's absolutely mind-blowing. You think about an individual and how much you are as a person and how many experiences you have, and then you somehow forget that the person standing in front of you is exactly as complicated and has had different experiences you've had. It's like you have to remember, like, check your privilege, check yourself, and just look at them as a human. I think that really helps you get over your fear, really. I think fear really often stands at the heart of bias.
That's right. Well, Kelly, I hate to do this to you, but we're almost out of time.
Right. Okay.
It's been such a rich conversation, but I want to give you a minute or two to just say some final words to our audience.
Okay, so it's call to action. It's 2023. The world is suffering from significant climate change. Social injustice and inequity is everywhere. It's at the global level, it's at the country level, it's in your community. Organizations are such an important part of the ecosystem. So I guess the questions I have for the audience are, how can your organization make a difference? And we see a lot of it with community volunteering stuff. We see a lot with environmental, social, and governance work that's happening. But what can you get curious about in your organization? Like I got curious. What can you get curious about? And then what can you get creative about? And how could you, as an individual, help to shift and drive towards a change which you want to see in the world? Because we know that when people are better engaged, you get better results, and you have more people come to the conversation, you get better solutions. And I think the final call to action, and this has been the most important revelation for me, was how can you give yourself time to think? Because you have these huge brains with all this experience, giving yourself, as you said, the white space in between action to really delve into and allow yourself to kind of be free and be creative. I think it's difficult, really difficult with the pressures of who often modern life and daily life. But giving yourself that time and space is so important. So that would be my final parting thoughts. Give yourself time to think.
Kelly, thank you so much. I am so appreciative of your time. Speaking of time, thank you.
And you too, and thank you for inviting me on. I love our conversations. They always I'm always on the edge of my thinking, and I'm trying to race to catch up. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Wow. You know, I always find it amazing the routes that my conversations take when I'm talking to people. They are not whatever that I expect, but happy that I took the route nonetheless. I left a question with Ed Hoffman at the beginning of the show, and I have to tell you that we have run out of time. And I'll tell you what his answer was. And it was one that Kelly already delivered, which is you have to create a safe space where people feel that they can ask a question. Thank you for joining me on this segment of Unlocked. I hope you enjoyed it. And that if you did, make a comment in social media about what you learned and what might do differently as a result. And if you're on YouTube, click the like button, or better yet, subscribe. I am Madeline Blair, wishing you infinite possibilities as you unlock your resilience.